I finally had the realization after studying feminism enough that feminism actually has established a shadow church. It's got this idol, which we've talked about already, this idea of autonomy. That's really the goal, and everything else is meant to be in service to that.
I know this ambition gap is troubling to you. Essentially, women are leaning out. They're deciding they don't want to be promoted because it doesn't seem worth it. After all the work that's been done, all the talk, what do you think broke?
Well, let's start at the top. So not all women are leaning out and not all companies. But what our report shows this year, this is our 11th year, is that about half of companies no longer prioritize advancement for women. And 21% of those companies say women's career advancement is a low or no priority at all. And those are the companies that participated in the Women in the Workplace report we do with McKinsey. And so these companies in many ways are the best of the best. And then we do see that ambition gap, but only when women don't get the opportunities and support they need. So what's happening is that women face more barriers at every level of the career. Entry level, we call it the broken rung, and we see it every year. For every 100 men that get promoted, 93 women, 60 Black women, 82 Latinas. That's because we hire and promote men based on potential and women for what they've already proven. Then at the senior levels, our report shows this year that at the same levels, a man is 70% more likely to get tapped for leadership training. Think about what that says. You're a future leader, come to leadership training. And so this is only happening in the companies that aren't doing the right thing. When women get the full support and the same stretch opportunities, they're not leaning out at all. And so it's a question of economic productivity.
I have to admit that it's a bit strange listening to the beginning of Sheryl Sandberg's argument for DEI, specifically for women, at a time where the economy has shed over 1 million jobs in the last year, and we're in the midst of a historic trade deficit with China to the tune of probably $1.2, $1.3 trillion by the end of the year. The appeal for women to be in leadership positions, not because it's going to help us make more money, because women are more productive than ever before, but because it's a quote-unquote right thing to do, is kind of strange to me. But then, if you listen to some of the arguments for feminism, it kind of makes sense, because it's not about the bottom line. It's about something that has absolutely nothing to do with that.
That's the first wave, and then the second wave happens with Betty Friedan and the publication of her book, The Feminine Mystique. And that was in 1963. And at that point, you really see this integration of Marxist concepts involved in the second wave. And that's really where, abortion is legalized. And you have the dramatic shift in understanding of woman, where woman becomes kind of a victim and men become the victimizers. And that actually is built into the ideology. And then you move on to the third and the fourth wave, which involved intersectionality, and then, of course, the trans movement. So it's had a long history, but I think the roots of it really, and the footprint of it really started in the first wave. And I think that's something that very few people know, is how the ideas for the second, third, and fourth wave were already there in the first wave.
This is an interview with Dr. Carrie Gress, and she's speaking about the beginning or the progressions of feminism in the beginning of this interview. But she goes on to link something that I never really considered. I can't say that I know if it's true or not. It's just a very interesting coincidence, if you will. Keep listening.
So the root of all this is about women being oppressed by the so-called patriarchy. And this is something that we're told constantly when we're growing up. This is just this is just the mainstream view now across the West. Do you disagree with that premise that women have historically been oppressed by men, and that feminism's goals of liberating women from this oppression is worthy?
Yeah, no, I think that really that what's happened was, and again, this goes back to Mary Wollstonecraft, where she's against any kind of hierarchy. She really wants to see women, in many respects, just become like men. And that's one of the things that starts early on. And some of it has to do with the fact that the home is denigrated at that stage. It had been really the locus of activity. And then the Industrial Revolution happens. And so the home becomes, everything that used to happen in the home got pushed out into the world. And so women's role really became denigrated. And rather than saying, how do we help women feel a sense of purpose again because we've changed the home. The feminist answer was, how do we make women more like men? And Wollstonecraft is the forerunner of that, and we just see it get tighter and tighter in that model. But there has to be an enemy, and that is the patriarchy. And this is really what the women in the United States were doing, was trying to undermine Christianity, because they were saying that men were using Christianity to oppress men.
These days, if you search the internet for Wicked, you're going to get hits on Wicked and the Wicked sequel, which are a story, I guess it's some kind of love story of two witches that are doing something. I guess it shows my age, because the real Wicked that I know is this one.
Now this one dedicated to man, them call MacGyver. 1, 2, 3, and I come with the Wicked.
But now we get this Wicked.
Alphabet.
Glinda.
Alphabet.
Glinda.
I'm a witch.
And I'm a witch.
But which is which?
Well, here's the sitch.
We were roommates back at school.
Alfie's awkward.
Glinda's cool.
We were strangers.
That's no lie.
But now we're besties, ride or die.
The school we go to, it's called
Fizz.
I study hard for every
quiz.
While Glinda chases boys with
Riz.
But one day we'll both meet
The Wiz.
So feminism, rather than solving the issue, actually just sort of has sealed women off from relationships, from children, from husbands. And the idea is really to focus on our autonomy and to not really allow ourselves to be vulnerable in any way. And
I have to admit that it's a bit strange when I see TikToks of young ladies that are bawling their eyes out and they're posting it on social media for everyone to know how affected they were emotionally by the ending of a movie about two witches. I mean, I like Star Wars, but I don't know if it's moved me to tears. So I almost kind of wonder if these kinds of movies have become a substitute for something that used to be the case. In a time where young ladies are more autonomous than ever before, and they're saying that men are just dead weight and they're shunning marriage, 40, 50 years ago, this was the story of Cinderella, and girls were crying at the wedding, instead of the end of this movie with two witches meeting
The Wiz.
Okay, you mentioned the occult. I think this is fascinating. Can you tell us about feminism's connection with the occult?
yeah. So this actually started with Percy Bysshe Shelley, who was Mary Wollstonecraft's son-in-law. They actually never met because she died giving birth to Mary Shelley. But he was fascinated by Mary's work, and he was also fascinated by William Godwin's work. And William Godwin was the biggest promoter of the end of monogamy. He thought that it was a kind of slavery for women. So Shelley takes those two ideas, and then he adds a third, which is this idea of the occult. He was fascinated by it himself. He slept in a coffin one night so that he could connect with the devil. I mean, it was something that he was very involved in. And he writes a poem about this woman named Sithna, and she has all three of those things: the contempt for men, then the promiscuity, and the occult. And so it's really interesting to see those three things together, because if you look at most, especially women in college today, most of them are involved in all three of those elements. But Shelley didn't stop there. He knew that there was really, what had to happen was a rewriting of Genesis. And he promoted this idea using Paradise Lost of how do we rewrite Genesis so that Eve is a heroine. And she ends up getting some knowledge from the serpent. And these ideas really took hold. And so when Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who was a suffragette in the United States, got interested in the women's movement, she became very involved in not only this idea about Eve, but also trying to eliminate the Bible, because she believed it was the way in which women were enslaved. But she was also involved in what was called spiritualism. And this was a movement going on, particularly in New York State, where people would sit around a table and invite spirits in, basically like a seance, I think, and ask questions, and the spirit would knock, supposedly, at the table. And so this is where she got the idea for the Seneca Falls Conference that she hosted. And this table is actually in the Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C. today. So this is far from the only people that were involved in the occult. There was another woman who gets very little credit, but she was involved in the feminist movement, the women's movement, with Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, and her name was Matilda Gage.
Now, I'm going to say a disclaimer on all of this because, again, this is not something that I've researched. This is just a video I found on YouTube. I can't vouch for how true it is or not true it is, but it's very interesting that there's this concerted effort to make many of these young ladies just reject what's worked for such a long time and embrace something that's very different. Now, of course, the environment's going to have something to do with it, but this idea that my autonomy is most important. I need the ability to do whatever I want to do with my body, even if it means the idea that I'm great with child and I choose my autonomy over the life of that child because of 20 years of inconvenience, which essentially reverses the mother instinct that many of us thought we saw in women, to essentially women are basically men, except kind of, sort of, sometimes yes, and kind of, sort of, sometimes no. I know, it is kind of.
She was the mother-in-law of L. Frank Baum, who wrote The Wizard of Oz. She was very much a promoter of witchcraft. And you can see that in The Wizard of Oz, because she believed in the idea of good witches and bad witches. And of course, that's, the embodiment of the Wizard of Oz, but also this turning of the patriarchy on its head, where, Baum writes about the wizard who ends up just being, an old, frail man behind a curtain. And that was really so much of his mother-in-law's influence. So anyway, it's that the cult is a major piece really throughout the movement. And then when communism comes in, there are elements of it that are more atheistic. But I think more recently, the occult is also, in the second wave in particular, has come back with full force. And of course, today there are more women practicing Wicca in the United States than Presbyterianism, which is a major denomination here in the U.S.
That's fascinating. I did know that witchcraft is a thing here in the US, I suppose in Britain as well, to an extent. And it does seem to impact women, you're right, more than men, and a very particular type of woman.
Full of young women that are infected with the Jezebel spirit.
And you mentioned The Wizard of Oz. It's fascinating because this film, Wicked, has just come out, Wicked Part 2. And that tries to kind of throw The Wizard of Oz's story on its own head, saying the kind of evil witch or the wicked witch was actually a good person or something. I don't know.
Yeah, so I haven't seen it either. Yeah.
Is Wicked also, I guess, part of this occult feminist message, do you think? Do you see a lot of this stuff in the pop culture today with things like Wicked and other movies and TV shows?
No, I think absolutely. Even the movie Barbie was really amazing. It was incredibly feminist movie, but I think feminism has had this capacity to sort of rebrand itself over the years and make it attractive to different generations. Wicked feels like it's another effort at that, and it's even more sinister because of the fact that it involves so much of the occult. I went to the mall recently with one of my daughters, and I was just amazed at how much witchcraft content there was in places like Barnes and Noble, and also just in regular stores because of the influence of that film. So it seems like that as a movement, it just continues to sort of ratchet it up and bring, influence people in ways they don't even realize they're being influenced by the occult, and kind of absorbing it and normalizing it in the culture.
Every woman should have the Jezebel spirit.
I couldn't agree more. I think that every woman should have a Jezebel spirit. And you know what'll bring you one step closer to getting that Jezebel spirit? Listening to my podcast, cleverly titled The Jezebel Spirit Podcast.
Of course, I can't say definitely that there's some strong connection between feminism and the occult. That would be a huge stretch, especially since I haven't researched it. But this woman has, and she's found reason to make that link. Now, again, I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm not saying it's true or if it's not true. But what we cannot deny is that what young girls used to go into the store and play with or idolize before was Cinderella. Now they're going into the store and they're idolizing witches. Now, is that what feminism wanted? I don't know. But it is a very interesting correlation, if not causation, that instead of young ladies wanting to be brides and princesses, now they're essentially saying, not only do I want my autonomy, but I want my autonomy to be subsidized by someone. That's essentially the appeal we heard at the beginning of this video. Why aren't these companies finding a way to elevate these women instead of the companies saying, we need to find the best people for the job because we're trying to make money? Instead, it's my autonomy is so important that the environment around us is supposed to bend to my will. And maybe there's some connection to the witch stuff. I don't know. But it's a very interesting thing to notice. And there are some scholars that are trying to understand and unravel this whole wicked thing. Why is this so important to young ladies to see these good and bad witches fighting to the point where they're bawling at the end of the movie, and then are walking out of the movie and saying, having a boyfriend is an albatross and I don't want to do any man keeping. I just want to do my own thing. And by the way, I want the right to continue not having children even if I'm 3, 4, 6 months along with a child in my stomach. I can't speak to why or how or what that is. All I can say is that my ideas of women have been greatly challenged by what I've seen in the last 30, 40 years from Western women particularly. I don't know what you can call it, but somewhere, some kind of way, I sense a bit of it is wicked. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, comment below. Catch you next video. Take care, guys.